What kind of building is designed to survive the city itself, yet ends up absorbing its darkest stories? At the northwest corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West stands the Dakota, a 9-story mass of German Renaissance brick, sandstone, and terracotta that looks less like an apartment house and more like a European fortress dropped onto Manhattan soil. When construction began in the early 1880s, this part of New York was considered so remote that critics joked its name referred not to architecture but geography, as distant and uninhabited as the Dakota Territory. The city ended miles south, horses outnumbered people, and Central Park itself was still settling into existence. Yet by October 1884, the Dakota stood completed, imposing iron gates guarding a massive carriage archway, behind which a tunnel nearly 40 feet long leads inward before suddenly opening into a private courtyard roughly 100 feet square, an enclosed world hidden from the street, silent, controlled, and intentionally unreachable. The Dakota was built to feel permanent in an era of uncertainty. Its walls were thick, its corners fortified, its layout inward-facing, designed not for display but for protection. The workforce fluctuated between 200 and 400 laborers at any given time, working in an age with almost no safety standards. There were no hard hats, no harnesses, no workers' compensation. Falls from scaffolding, crushing injuries from stone blocks, and fatal accidents were common and rarely recorded with more than a sentence in the papers. Death was not scandal. It was simply considered part of the cost of building something grand. Each brick and beam rose through human risk, embedding the structure with the invisible weight of 19th century labor. At first, the Dakota was ridiculed. Wealthy New Yorkers were expected to live downtown, not isolated on the edge of civilization. The idea that affluent families would move into a massive apartment building rather than individual townhouses was itself controversial. The Dakota was a gamble, an architectural provocation, a palace built in what many believed would never become valuable land. But the city did what cities always do. It grew. Streets filled, transit expanded, and Manhattan crept northward until the Dakota was no longer stranded. It was central. What had once been mocked as a rich man's mistake became one of the most desirable addresses in New York. As decades passed, the Dakota evolved from architectural experiment into cultural symbol. Artists, musicians, and intellectuals were drawn to its seclusion, its privacy, and its sense of being cut off from the chaos just beyond its gates. Then, in 1968, the building's image was burned into global consciousness when Rosemary's Baby used the Dakota's exterior to represent the Bramford, a Gothic apartment house steeped in paranoia and evil. The film transformed the building's already imposing design into something mythic, an urban castle hiding unspeakable secrets. The association was so powerful that just 1 year later, in 1969, New York City granted the Dakota official landmark status, preserving its exterior forever, as if sealing its face in time. But no film, no legend, and no architecture could prepare the world for what happened on the night of December 8, 1980. At around 10:50 p.m., John Lennon and Yoko Ono returned home to the Dakota after a recording session. As they approached the entrance, shots were fired from just outside the gate. Lennon was struck multiple times and staggered into the building's passageway, collapsing near the doorman station, beneath the vaulted arch he had walked through countless times before. Emergency services arrived quickly, but the damage was catastrophic. Lennon was pronounced dead shortly afterward, and the Dakota, designed as a refuge, became the site of one of the most shocking assassinations in modern cultural history. By morning, the iron gates were no longer symbols of privacy or prestige. They were covered in flowers, candles, letters, and tears. Fans from around the world gathered in silence outside the entrance, transforming the Dakota into a global mourning site. The building did not just witness history, it absorbed it. From that night forward, the Dakota ceased to be merely an apartment house or even a landmark. It became a symbol of contradiction, safety and vulnerability, isolation and exposure, permanence and loss. A fortress that was never supposed to work, yet endured long enough to become inseparable from the city, the culture, and the tragedies that shaped it.